You are listening to 99.1 WQRT LP Indianapolis, and this is Create Here. Produced by artists and curators from Big Car Collaborative, Create Here is your place to listen to conversations with people making intriguing, innovative, and impactful things happen on the cultural front in Indianapolis, Indiana, and beyond. Find out more and access additional episodes at WQRT.org.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Create Here. My name is Shauta Marsh. I'm co-founder of Big Car, director of programming and exhibitions, and today we're joined by Kaila Austin. Kaila Austin is an artist and public historian from Indianapolis. She attended Indiana University, triple majoring in art history, African American studies, and painting. Since 2019, she has run her own historic consulting organization, Rogue Preservation Services. For the last 2 years, she's been working with 6 Reconstruction-era African-American neighborhoods to record, preserve, and uplift the stories of the U.S. colored troops on the southeast side of Indianapolis. The public arts play a major role in telling these stories and reimagining our city through a Black lens. Austin is also an artist in residence at Big Car Collaborative's long-term residency program on the southeast side of Indianapolis. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kaila.
Of course. Glad I can be here.
And you have an exhibit opening soon with us that I'm very excited about and honored to get to host. I don't know of many projects like it in the world, frankly, because essentially with the project, it's a multi-generational project. I'm going to have you tell us more about this show and how it is this.
The project as a whole is pretty complicated, I think. It is this intergenerational archiving process, but it's also about community development and, community engagement. How do we listen to people and how do we help them design the worlds that they want to live in, right? And I'm from the southeast side, so I'm deeply invested in what our neighborhood looks like in the next 100 years. The project I've been working on with the descendants of the U.S. colored troops, before we started, there was almost no history on the colored troops for the state of Indiana. There was only one regiment that was stationed in Fountain Square. And they did some pretty remarkable things. They defeated Robert E. Lee in the Civil War, and then they were sent out to Galveston and performed Juneteenth. When the Civil War's over, they come back home and they set up these communities that are now some of the most, at least Norwood and Barrington, one of the oldest and most stable Black communities in the United States. I think in the first 200 lots of the neighborhood, there are about 30 descendant families still living on their original properties from the Civil War, which means they've been there for about, 150 years. Some of the oldest lot work dating back to 1839, so they've been there almost since the founding of the city of Indianapolis. There's this huge archival void for this story. And I kind of stumbled into it a few years ago. I got a commission from SIND, Southeast Neighborhood Development, to do a project that ended up being called Memory Keepers, where I went around and interviewed grassroots community leaders on the southeast side, most of them like 80 plus years old, just to figure out, with the new jail, the community justice campus opening on the southeast side, our neighborhood was going to shift, right? So what was their neighborhood like? What is it like now? What was it like before? What was it like when you were a child? How do you remember it? What is it like now? And how would you like to reimagine it in the future? And it ended up really kind of grounding me and embedding me in the southeast side in a way that I didn't really expect. I had just moved back home right before the pandemic started, and this was not necessarily where I had imagined myself. So my goal with the Memory Keepers project was to embed myself in my neighborhood and figure out what makes it worth it to be there, right? I have to be here. Now it's a pandemic. I'm definitely not moving anywhere. How do I create a positive attachment to the place that I was born. And I had the great fortune of sitting down with just a bunch of little old ladies who were very passionate about their communities and their work. And in Norwood in particular, I got to interview an elder named Miss Flanora Frazier, and was 91 when we did the interview. She's 94 now. Wow. And when you start an oral history interview, you go, who are you? Where'd you come from? How'd you get here? Right? And she said, ooh, do you want to hear about my grandfather? No one ever asked me about him anymore. I was like, okay, tell me. You're 90. You're excited. So there must be a good story here. And she said, oh, well, my grandfather escaped slavery at 13 years old and joined the U.S. colored troops and founded this church on the corner in 1889. I'm like, whoa, hold on. I've lived across the street most of my entire life except for school, and how did I never know this story? About myself, about the place that I'm from, and I think the Southeast side in particular, people don't know a lot about us. They don't know, and especially in the Black community, when I say that I'm from the Southeast side, they say, why?
Yeah.
Because that's not the reputation that we're known for having, right? And so I was like, whoa, what's going on here? I start talking to other neighbors, and they're like, oh, she's nothing special. We're all the U.S. colored troops. I was like, okay. And then another neighborhood, Barrington, reaches out to me, and they go, Norwood's nothing special. We're all the colored troops, too. So now we've found about 6 neighborhoods, and between the 6 of them, about 250 descendant families still living on their original lots, which is just an astronomical number in terms of community stability. And another added benefit of these neighborhoods is that I don't know what they're doing, but these people are living to 100, 105, 110 pretty regularly. Mm-hmm. Like Miss Flanora, her older brother is still alive. He's 98, and her younger brother is still alive, and he's 90. And they have been bickering like siblings for almost 100 years, And I think when this project started, we've lost quite a few elders in the last couple of years with the pandemic. I think we still have about 30 elders between 90 and 108 years old that we've been interviewing. So the exhibit is kind of an attempt for me to visualize this story, right? Portraits and painting are just kind of how I process the world, and it just kind of helps me to take a step back and look at things in a slower perspective. I think when I'm painting, I don't remember where I was going with that.
I think, it's, you were saying through your work as a painter, it's helped you process these stories.
Yeah, because it's kind of it's kind of a heartbreaking thing, right? To realize how big the archival void is and what that does to people to not know those stories about themselves and about the places that they're from. I was talking with the executive director of GEARS, which is the Global Institute for Research, Education, and Scholarship, Konstantinos, and he said he actually built the archive in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He built the Black Wall Street Archive. And so when I started this project, I reached out to him and was like, hey, we're having a similar conversation in a different way here in Indianapolis, and how should I approach this? And when he was talking to me, he was like, you have to understand that feeling like you're nowhere, right, and feeling like you're nobody is a tactic, right? If you can't see yourself, if you can't value yourself, how do you dream of a future? How do you make plans to stabilize yourself? And how do you invest in yourself if you have never seen anyone like you achieve things like this? And so to be able to pull these stories back up through the surface, and especially the story of like John Hardrick, a Black painter from the Southeast side, who also was poor and a single father and, dealt with all of these same issues that I'm dealing with today, 100 years later. And it's one of the first times I've felt seen in the city, right? I was able, by being able to pull this story back up, now I understand why I'm on the Southeast side. It wasn't an accident. There's just not Black people over here for no reason. It was because the colored troops were stationed here, and because Black veterans could buy property and vote, they were able to create stable, long-lasting communities that let me be in the Southeast side. And that embedded arts into the Southeast side and embedded culture, even if we haven't been recognized by our city or our state, because of the stability of these communities, they've been able to keep their own memory alive. And that's something I think we're all trying to relearn right now.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, there's the victors get to tell the stories and the history. So there's been so many cultures erased and there's been so much lost knowledge. And it's amazing that you stumbled upon this at a time when it was where we were running out of time to know ourselves as a city, and as you said, especially it was shocking to me when you told me, because I knew that within communities of color that the Southeast side had such a bad reputation of not being safe or welcoming, especially, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, on up into the mid-2000s. So can you talk more about, just retrieving this history and knowing how has it been received as you've shared this history of our city? Are people, taking it in? Are there other organizations reaching out to you to help you preserve it?
Yeah, I think that this story, in terms of its public reception, has it gets a lot of mixed responses, right? Because it's a beautiful, it's a powerful story, right? A story of resilience. How do you stay exactly where you want to be, even when maybe the people around you don't want you there? And in the Southeast side, in a very serious way, with the establishment of the Klan in Fountain Square and Irvington and Beech Grove and all of these locations. And it's a beautiful story. It's resilience, but it's also in a lot of ways very heartbreaking, right? Especially with the opening of the new community justice campus on Norwood's northern boundary. It's been a torn response. Mm-hmm. I think I feel the same way about the project a lot of the time. It's a beautiful thing, but to look at the story and the project and the process in its eyes reveals all of these flaws in our city, right? But I believe that only through the process of revealing those flaws can we begin to fix them. Mm-hmm. And that this is a story that we can be proud of. So the last year in February, the project kind of came to a boiling point with the development of the new community justice campus, and we found out last February that they were going to build the new morgue, the new coroner's facility on John Hardrick's family property, and the not work release, but where the prisoners work at was going to be in the back, which I just felt was far too symbolic to put on the colored troops during their 150th year. So we met with the city. The city came out to the neighborhood and gave their presentation on the morgue property, and I mean within 3 days it was canceled. Now that property has been turned over to Indy Parks for redevelopment, which is a really phenomenal. The Hardrick property, even if it was just John Hardrick's house, would have been a phenomenal space, a good story to tell in that space. But it is also a Lenape, a Delaware Indian orchard forest, right?
Right.
The big four railroads that make us the crossroads of America cross on the property. So there are all of these layers of story on the southeast side that really tell the city as more of a patchwork, as a quilt, right? There are all these different parts and you stitch them together, and that is how you get the story of Indianapolis. It is not a monolith. Getting this story told in the city has been a little bit difficult. We do have some great partners. We're partnered with Indiana Landmarks, of course, helping us with heritage preservation, figuring out how we can put in historic districts and repair buildings and do things like that. We partnered with Digital Indy from the Indianapolis Public Library, which is helping us store the archive as we build it, so helping us scan it and give it a public repository so these stories can be accessible for future generations. I've been working with Capra Institute, trying to figure out what land looks like down here. But really where we have a lot of pull is on the national level. The story of Norwood and the story of the Southeast Side and the colored troops captures so much of Black history in the United States, right? If these people are getting here in 1839, these are small settlements. These are farmers, right? And you can track the neighborhoods. You can go pre-Civil War, through the Civil War, through the Reconstruction period, through World War I, and the archives are immaculate. They've never moved, right? I have everything my grandmother ever owned in this house. And through that, we've been able to reconstruct and hit almost every major point in Black history in a 2-mile square neighborhood.
That's
right?
amazing.
So we've been able to pull in organizations like the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History Culture to help us with kind of a more broad-scale digitization program, because some of it's out of Digital Indy's capacity, because there's a lot of videos and a lot of audio, and trying to figure out what to do with all of those. We have started the process of getting on the National Park Service African American Civil Rights Network, which will provide the neighborhoods with resources to do repairs and to advocate for themselves on the national level. And when we recently have started a partnership with the Trust for Public Lands, which will come in and help us purchase back big swatches of land to redevelop.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. And so with this kind of help from the national bodies, we've been able to pull these resources back down to Indianapolis in a way that helps all of us with the Smithsonian. All of the documents that are scanned in Indianapolis when they come to visit us next year will immediately be added into the National Archives in the Library of Congress, right? Which will make Black Indianapolis searchable for the first time. It will digitize us, so that will pull in more researchers and more whatever comes out of it. Some very cool stuff. And then we also recently got a grant through the Our Town program with the National Endowment for the Arts to build a Black Heritage Trail for the city of Indianapolis that will integrate all of these histories through the South Side, but through the rest of the city, into a public format where the descendants, where the people get to decide how the story of their neighborhood is told. And I think it's going to be a pretty spectacular project once it gets out there.
Oh my gosh, it is. I mean, this is such great news for our city, and I just so appreciate all that you're doing, for this. But before we talk about the exhibit, you're talking about this work, and, it's not usually something that people associate with being an artist, going to neighborhood meetings, community organizing, as you have done, especially, you have a studio practice as well, can you talk about that like this, taking these stories, painting and community how does that all work for you as an artist?
I have to remind everyone when I'm doing all this organizing work, like, I'm a painter. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm piecing this kind of together as we go. What I had going for me before this started was that I, had worked in a museum in exhibit installation and design, talking about how do we interpret history and how do we display that history in the museum, but also in the public space, and what does that mean, right? And I just, in the museum field, I just couldn't find anything that felt right, that felt like it was truly engagement, that felt like people were feeling seen in the exhibits that are coming up, that we were installing. And it's really hard to argue with institutions, to be perfectly honest. It's just sometimes not worth the effort, right? So I was like, okay, we're going to pull back from the museum. And because my goal was to embed myself back into my community, I couldn't see any way to do it than to sit down and ask them what they wanted. I mean, and sometimes the easiest place to get everyone together is a neighborhood meeting. They're already there. But a lot of it's kind of, I'll go back to Norwood a little bit. It's a very insulated community, right? It's like the same people have been there for 200 years, right? So when new people come in, there's a trust building thing that has to happen, right? They don't know me. They don't know my mom. They don't know my grandma. They don't know anyone. I'm an outsider that's coming in to like essentially a very closed off and self-sustaining community. And you know me. I can be a little aggressive sometimes, right? Like I can kind of like force myself into a room because I think that we have to do that sometimes. But in this neighborhood in particular, that wasn't going to work, right? In order for the project to stay authentic and for the stories to stay authentic, I had to get to know them. And I have to get them to trust me, right? Because these aren't random things to them. This is my grandfather's baby picture, right? This is my family diary, and my neighborhood, and maybe I personally have been tricked and deceived so many times over the course of the last 150 years that I don't know you and I don't want to talk to you. They just finished hazing me 6 months ago. It's been a long process, but they had to know that I was there for them. And not that I was there for the story, right? And I think that the park property and the housing redevelopment that's happened in the neighborhoods, and even just the fact that people are now coming to them and asking them how they feel about something before they build it, right? All of these things have helped them realize that, I'm not here to kind of profiteer off this situation. I'm not profiteering at all.
Right. Yeah.
It is very much a pro bono project. And I just think that it was the right thing to do. And for me, it would have been hard to learn the story and then walk away and watch it become a morgue and a bail bondsman's office and a rehab center, and to watch all of that shift this neighborhood in a way that they didn't ask for, and in a way that they specifically kind of asked not for. So the community building came organically. There was no other way to do it, I think. They wouldn't have trusted me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is at the heart of what I believe about art, which is that, the best art points to the truth of humanity and in turn creates beauty out of it. And that's why some people don't always understand how this, a lot of times social practice art can be art, or how important, if you are co-creating with the community, it is important, this process, which brings us to the title of your exhibit, Process as Practice, Reimagining the Lost Hardrick Mural. So let's dig deeper in to what you uncovered as part of this project is about this exhibit.
So we originally, I mean, obviously I didn't know that it was the home of John Wesley Hardrick. I guess I'll kind of start there, explaining who he is. So John Wesley Hardrick was an impressionist painter here in the city of Indianapolis. He was born in Norwood in 1891, and probably at his house, I would imagine, because Norwood was located outside of city limits. It was considered a free town, so an independent village, so they did not have access to city resources until the 1920s and 30s. So John Hardrick's born in Norwood. The neighborhood's probably already been established for like 50 years. They already have their school in place. It was the Norwood Colored School No. 5, later became known as Harriet Beecher Stowe. Was a small school, but it roped in every black student within 2 miles of Norwood. So that's north to Michigan Road, west to Meridian Street, east to Emerson, and south to Troy. So this is not a small area that we're talking about here. It's almost more than the southeast quadrant because it goes north of Washington Street. The Norwood Colored School of Harriet Beecher Stowe had a principal named Ada Harris, and Ada Harris just kind of transforms this community. She was born in Kentucky, like most of the people in Norwood. She grows up over in Ransom Place and goes to Shortridge, and she's like one of the first black lady graduates in the city of Indianapolis. And you had to have a black woman who had graduated high school in order to start a school. Ada Harris is the 5th black woman to graduate high school. She is the principal of Norwood Colored School No. 5, right? So they move her out there, and Ada Harris is really a trailblazer in education. She's using methods that we are now kind of rediscovering again 100 years later. And the way that she structures the Norwood Colored School is almost like a Montessori school. So instead of having the school having a set curriculum, they just pay attention to what each child likes doing. And based on the child's interest, they build the curriculum to the student, right? Which is not something that's happening, I don't think, in the 1890s in the United States, right? But what it does is it creates these kids and these families that are deeply invested in their community because they know that their community is deeply invested in them, right? So John Hardrick starts painting according to his family. At like 3 years old, he's like on vacation selling drawings at the beach and stuff like that. Like, it's just kind of part of him. I think his daughter was like, I never saw him without a pencil in his hand, like my entire life. And so when he gets to Ada Harris, she teaches him how to paint, right? They teach him how to paint as best as she can from what she knows, which isn't necessarily a lot because it's only 30 years after the end of slavery, right? Everyone had been enslaved before 30 years ago. Right. So they are making this up as they go. And that's kind of the beauty and the hard part of the Reconstruction period, that decade or two after the Civil War, is they don't know what to do. And there's no guidance, right? Not too many people are out there saying, hey, this is how deep you dig your well. Hey, this is how you teach a student. Hey, this is how you... So they have to figure it out as they're going. So when John Hardrick's 8, Ada Harris enters him into... Is he 8? Something like that. Enters him into a painting contest for the Negro Business League, and he wins. Mm-hmm. And as a reward, she takes his painting down to Carl Lieber's shop on the Circle, so where Christ Church is. There used to be a framing shop in there, and then T.C. Steele's studio was in the top, right? So she takes the frame over to the Lieber family, and Carl Lieber is like, oh, this is a fantastic painting. Who did it? And she's like, you've got to hear about John Hardrick, right? And after that, the Lieber family pays for his education. his painting instruction. And in 1910, he becomes the first black student at Heron, when it's still over off Pennsylvania. And then when he starts high school, he is trained by Otto Stark, who's a member of the Hoosier Group, and William Edward Scott, who is another black Harlem Renaissance painter. Not really. He's a little before the Renaissance, but... and so he's getting trained by some of the most well-known artists in the state of Indiana, right? These are our Hoosier Group, and we don't talk often about the Hoosier Group having black members,
right?
Or the Hoosier Group having women members, right? But they did. And so this is another side of that story. So he trains with William Edward Scott and Otto Stark. They take him around, Irvington, Pleasant Run. They take him down to Brown County to paint. They've got all these landscapes from all over the state of Indiana. In 1924, I think, Hale Woodruff is also at Heron. So they were classmates at Heron. Hale Woodruff goes on to become like the epitome of Harlem Renaissance painters. He goes and trains under Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. He's a very big deal in the black art scene. And him and John Hardrick shared a studio for it looks like almost a decade on Indiana Avenue. And during that time period, and you'll be able to see it in the exhibit, how much their paintings talk to each other. Right, because you can say John Hardrick won the Harmon Foundation for Little Brown Girl in 1927. The Harmon Foundation is an award that was given out for black excellence. He got black excellence in painting. And so when you come to the exhibit, I've done these replica paintings, and it's John Hardrick's Little Brown Girl next to 3 other paintings by Hale Woodruff during the same time period, like in the same year. And you can see how they're visually trading language, right? And you can see even as their careers separate, how there are some themes that stay the same through them. So it's just kind of an interesting study on how did John Hardrick become John Hardrick. So John wins the Harmon Foundation Medal in 1927, and Hale Woodruff wins it in 1928 with Hale Woodruff's $100. He goes to Paris, and he stays, But John Hardrick is a dad, and he's not going to leave his kids here to go to Paris. So he has to work with what he's got here, right? Like that. I think a lot of the artists in the city know what that's like, right? Like a lot of artists and parents in general know what that's like. Well, that would be a fantastic opportunity, but this little one needs me here. And you set yourself to the side for the greater benefit of your kids. And he does that. And his kids are phenomenal people afterwards.
You're listening to 99.1 WQRT FM Indianapolis. And we are joined today by Kaila Austin for Create Here, who is telling us about her exhibit opening soon at Tube Factory Art Space, Process as Practice, Reimagining the Lost Hardrick Mural. So Kaila, you were getting ready to tell us more about this specific piece you're recreating. Can you tell us why, and why do you need to recreate it?
Maybe I'm a little obsessive.
It exists. Does it exist anymore?
It's not. Right. Yeah, the mural does not exist anymore. So John Hardrick was the only African-American painter in the state of Indiana to get a Works Progress Administration mural. The Works Progress Administration was I think it's a post-war federal program that allowed cities to commission artists to do public artworks. Normally labor focused, right? This is like the 30s, 40s, right before World War II. And there's a huge industrial boom in the United States. But there's also the Great Depression. And so they need to figure out how to pay artists, right? Doesn't that sound familiar? Right?
Yes,
Doesn't
it
that sound
does.
weirdly similar to the 20s we're going through now? And so John Hardrick is the first person in line when the Works Progress Administration opens up applications. And he gets his mural. He is approved to do it at Crispus Attucks, which had just opened in 1927, so it would have been like a sparkling brand new school back then. And for those of you that don't know what Crispus Attucks is, in 1927, the Indianapolis public schools segregated formally. When they had been established in the 1850s, it was an integrated school system. Each neighborhood could kind of choose whether they really wanted to be integrated, but especially down here on the southeast side, they were all integrated schools. And so in 1927, they formally segregate IPS and send all the black students to one school and all the white students to another. We've got a lot of oral histories from the elders who had grown up in these integrated mixed-race communities, sitting at Crispus Attucks and waiting for their white friends to show up, and they never show up, right? So this is kind of a traumatizing moment for Indianapolis, right? Mm-hmm. Because it separates us from each other. We might not have been separated before. Certain parts of town, for sure, but especially on the southeast side, where there had been this large abolitionist movement and where there was a lot of, especially German and Jewish people who were interested in helping to stabilize black people after the end of slavery. It was a shock, right? And so Crispus Attucks opened in 1927, and they really wanted to promote black education, right? Crispus Attucks has almost all of their teaching staff in the 20s and 30s had PhDs. Like, they were doctorates. They couldn't get jobs anywhere else in the city of Indianapolis, so they teach at the school, right? Not jobs they deserve or would have been properly compensated for. Mm-hmm. And so they really were focusing on Attucks creating black excellence, right? They wanted them to be doctors, they wanted them to be lawyers, they wanted them to speak 5 languages, and they wanted them to be excellent, right? Which is also totally valid, right? They wanted black children to have these opportunities. But when it comes to John Hardrick's mural, this becomes a problem. The Works Progress Administration is a labor movement. John Hardrick is a poor black man who works at a foundry, right? And so when he gets his commission to do his Works Progress mural, he paints it of foundrymen, right? He paints it of people he worked with, people he could see himself in, right? And according to the oral histories from his daughter, who was there at the time, Miss Rowena, it was a beautiful piece, right? But because of Crispus Attucks's kind of hope to raise black doctors and lawyers and educators, they did not want to uplift the story of the working class. They thought that foundry workers, having a painting of foundry workers, having paintings of the lower class in the institution would distract the students from these lofty goals. And while I get where they were coming from, it's such a major oversight because how many black people in the 1920s were becoming doctors, mm-hmm. right? How many black people in the 1920s were able to leave the state of Indiana and go to college, right? And so by getting rid of that mural, they also kind of separate them. Crispus Attucks kind of separates themselves from the lower class, mm-hmm. right? And I can't imagine how heartbreaking that must have been for John Hardrick, right? To have been the only black artist in the state of Indiana to get this commission, right? And to do it at the school where my daughter went, right? And my kids are all there, and they say, take it down, and they put it in the basement, and it's never seen again. It's been lost for 100 years, almost. So
This is where you come in.
Yeah, this is where I come in, right? Yeah. And so I've been working with the family to kind of reimagine this mural, right? We've got this huge park property coming on the Hardrick property, right? 44 acres is no small chunk of change, right? That's a pretty good slice of land. We can
nice.
Figure out how. Been working with the family and the neighbors to figure out how they want to integrate this story into the park, right? So from its very beginning, they're like, what if we make our park into a living history museum, right? And you have to hand pump your water, right? And you have to like have a little station where they can hand wash their clothes through the little ringer, like a Black Connor Prairie, I guess. And so reimagining this mural became part of this kind of planning process. How do we reimagine the park and the park space, especially with its new proximity to the jail, which, is largely lower class Black and brown people in there, right?
Right.
And so how do we create a space that we can see ourselves in? And I think the Hardrick mural is a great example. So before the foundry that he worked in would have been over in Babe Denny, but Norwood, because of its proximity to the railroad, because of its proximity to the coal refinery, was an industrial neighborhood, right? They were working class. They were foundry men.
Yeah.
So to put this mural up there in the park, hopefully, we'll see what happens, gives another opportunity for them to see themselves. And for me to see myself in the place that I've always lived.
Yeah, and I really view this as like a collaboration between John Wesley Hardrick, who's passed, and his descendants, and even the neighborhood that helped raise him, which I can't think of another project that has happened. And you're also using some of his sketchbooks and diaries to help recreate this mural. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John Hardrick's family has been a fantastic collaborator for recreating this mural. Like I said, for all the families, they have these archives that date back almost to the Civil War. Some of them a little older. And the Hardrick family has their own. So each family has a memory keeper, and that person is in charge of holding on to the story of their family. And they do these like events where everyone sits around these big tables, and all the families, regardless of it, they don't even know each other, but they all do the same things, where they sit up their tables and they bring every member of the family from diapers upward to the table. We all sit down and we learn and remember this history together. And that's really where that intergenerational model comes in, and why I chose to pull it out for this project, is that they're already doing it. It's much easier to lean into the systems that are already there than to try to place something new on someone. But the Hardrick family has a pretty spectacular collection. All of these photos we have never seen of him, all of his sketchbooks and diaries, which does not help me with the mural because he didn't do sketches for any of his murals.
Really?
He just went in and painted them on site.
Oh, wow.
So what the closest we've got for the Lost mural is the National Malibu Company. He painted it in 1941, so like almost a decade after the mural. And it's almost exactly the same subject matter. 3 foundry workers. It's dark. It's city. It's gross looking. I don't imagine it would have inspired me to want to be a foundry worker. You know what I mean? Yeah. I would have been like, maybe I should stay in school. And so using kind of all of these little bits of the family and the diaries and the oral histories and the people in the neighborhood who were like, oh yeah, I do remember that guy that used to paint in the attic over there. We've just been able, I guess I've tried to take a step into his mind, right? I can never really get there because I am not John Hardrick and I am not Hal Woodruff, and there are so many things I just could not know. And especially like with recreating a foundry painting, I have never worked in a foundry. I have never been in a foundry. So I can only imagine what it would have been like. Whereas his work probably would have been a lot more effective because he knows how you move your body when you work in a foundry, right? So I can like kind of copy it, but I'm not sure that it will have the same energy as it did when he did it the first time.
Yeah.
And that's where the family interaction becomes real important. Hey guys, does this look like something he did? And they're like, no. Sometimes they're like, no, what are you doing? He would have used a lighter hand. He would have been more feathery. He would have used his palette knife more, and they're able to kind of coach me through the process of, becoming John Hardrick for this purpose.
It's like channeling in a way.
Yeah, sure.
In a way.
In a way. Just a painting way, not the witchy way.
Not the witchy way. And then...
Although maybe if I get desperate.
You might try it. You might want to try it.
I'd have to try it.
And then coming up, the other different thing about this exhibit is that people will see the progression of the mural, and they'll actually experience it first at Republic on East 10th Street here in Indianapolis on Sunday the 1st. Can you talk about your live paintings dates? It's going to start off there, and then people will also be able to come to different dates at Tube Factory to watch you work on the mural and your process.
Yeah. So in terms of like building the mural as the exhibit goes on, I can't say I do a lot of murals, but I've done quite a few. And one of the things I really love and kind of also a little irritating about doing murals is that people always want to talk to you. Like, I'm on a ladder 15 feet in the air. Like, please stop distracting me, right? They want to talk to you the whole time. Why are you doing this? Who is this? Where did it come from? Why? And because this story has like really never been told in this way, I've kind of thought that the best way to create that kind of almost like PR marketing would be to let's put the mural on the ground where the people are and talk to them while I'm building it, right? So that they can see what this looks like, because somebody else might know a little bit more about John Hardrick than me. I don't know. Maybe they're an impressionist painter and they can give me tips and I can tell them things and we can continue this conversation with the mural as the centerpiece, right? What does it mean what are the colored troops, right? Like that's one. People have no idea what I'm talking about. I used to get into a lot of trouble early on in the neighborhood because they were like, why do you keep calling us colored? And I was like, oh no, I have really messed up here, right? Like I have got to go way backwards in order to be able to tell this story and it hit in an impactful way that helps people understand what we're talking about. I could just slap a mural up on the wall, right? And that's a possibility, right? But it's not really getting to the heart of what I want the mural to be able to do, which is to create these conversations about how do we lose stories and how do we bring them back.
Yeah.
And that's easier to do in person than on paper.
It is. And how many panels is the mural? Tell us the size of the mural.
This one's small, so small enough. It's a 4 by 8 feet. So just literally a mock-up so that if we get the ability to put it in the park, it can become, a real full-size mural. The size of the mural is also pretty accurate to the size of murals back in the 1920s because materials were only available in smaller sizes, right? We don't even think about that. That technological advancements are wise. We can do 40-foot murals. Back then a mural would have been, 8 feet. Mm-hmm. So, and I think it helps to keep it intimate.
Yeah.
Right. I could have made it bigger, but I think at that size, the foundry workers, you will be able to step into them, right? You will be able to like stand almost eye to eye with them and look into their world. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the point of the project as a whole. How do we look into other people's worlds, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I think we'll get a glimpse.
Yeah. Probably.
What else will people see when they come to the exhibit?
So there's all of these replicas. So it kind of starts off with my story as a painter. Who was I before I started this project, right? I don't want to go into this as if I was an unbiased participant in it, right? I had a life and experience and things that I focused on and what I looked at, right? So I want that to be a part of it. A lot of the pieces are replicas, right? So they're replicas of, as I discussed earlier, replicas of Hardrick's work or Hale Woodruff's or T.C. Steele or Otto Stark, and they're all up there just to kind of get used to his visual language. Like, this was his teacher, this was his best friend, this was his, and this is how we got to here. The last major part, except for the mural itself, is the portraits and the oral histories from the Norwood community. So using their photo collection and, you know, sitting down, asking them about their lives and everything, we've been kind of able to pull these snippets of stories out. So like, oh, this is Miss Flenora's Uncle Lewis, and Uncle Lewis looks like he can play the guitar, but he cannot. He was a prankster, right? And so it's her talking about how her uncle used to act. And so you can really get to know them. And I always felt like in museums, that's something that portraiture misses. The painting itself is, a beautiful thing, but who is this person and what is their story, and maybe what was their laugh like, and how did their sense of humor work, and all of those parts are the interesting parts to me that make artwork and stories and communities human, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a complicated project, but I felt like it was kind of essential to stitch all of these parts together. Without knowing about Norwood, you can't really understand why John Hardrick turned out the way he did, because they were so critical to his development. And without broadening the idea of the Hoosier group, right? We very much see it as like a white monolith, but that's not actually what was happening. How do we tell more true stories, or accurate, however we want to frame it?
The exhibit will continue to change throughout, so people will want to visit it multiple times. It does have a 3-month run, October 6th through December 17th. Another special thing that will happen during the exhibit is that you will first air the film on Veterans Day? Tell us about the film that they won't be able to see the first month, but they'll be able to see after the 11th in the video room. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm like, one of the millions of things we've been working on is been creating a documentary about all of this. I thought that it was pretty essential to not only capture the oral histories, but to capture what these people look like and what they sound like and what does their community feel like, right? It's a feeling that a lot of us don't get to have. That interconnectedness of knowing all of your neighbors for 200 years, is really lost in the United States. And especially when I'm talking to people from immigrant communities, they're like, oh, my village back home was like that. We knew everybody for 400 years, And so it's not a very American experience, right? Because we just are such individualists. I forgot the original question.
No, about the film that you're going to show.
Okay.
But that is all true. And You're not off track.
Yeah, I just forgot the thread. And so how do we tell the story of a community, and especially one that has been left out of the story of our city, right? And so we've been recording all of their community events. Like they have community reunions where everyone from across the U.S. comes back home, and they just have barbecues for 3 days and just like see each other again. And that kind of intentionality. And then to juxtapose that with the jail, right? With the community justice campus sitting on 140 acres and risking disrupting what this community built themselves to be, right? And a lot of layers of symbolism on putting the colored troops in the jail right next to each other, right? It's a little bit too much to dig into for the remainder of this interview. And using the documentary as a way to tell this story on a more national scale, that it's something that people are going to be able to identify with, I hope, and also learn from, right? To learn, how do I be a community? How do I build something stable and something that lasts? So for in the video room will not be the full documentary, but it will be a trailer, a little 5-7 minutes to really that we're sending out to do fundraising if anyone out there is interested. But also to just get this story out into the public space for the first time, and to give the descendants the authority and the agency to choose how that story is being told, I think is a new way to look at history here.
Yeah. One thing you told me that I hadn't known is the story about Little Brown Girl. Can you share that with the audience? That painting, it's at the IMA currently, right?
Yeah. With the Harmon Foundation. I don't know.
It was, you told me it had been lost. And I didn't realize. So like this is what I'm saying is like there's a common like thread. There's a what is the word? Reoccurring theme within even Hardrick's work where pieces disappear and then they resurface. And Little Brown Girl disappeared and then resurfaced, and then this mural disappeared, and you are making it resurface.
Hopefully. Little Brown Girl. So when Little Brown Girl won the Harmon Foundation Medal in 1927, it was purchased by the Black Citizens Group of Indianapolis and donated to the Indianapolis Museum of Art, now Newfields. And I think he became one of the first Black painters in their collection, maybe like first two. In the 30s, late 30s, early 40s, they lend the painting, Little Brown Girl, out to a hotel in southern Indiana. The hotel closes down within like 6 months or something like that, and they auction off everything that was in the hotel. So the IMA never got the painting back, and it's just missing. They didn't even really know it was missing until an art dealer out in New York City, I think it's like 1996, contacted them and said, "Hey, I just bought your painting at an auction. Do you want this back?" And the IMA was like, "Yeah, for sure. We didn't even know that was missing." And it comes back home, and the IMA does an exhibit. I think it's one of the first ones they ever do on Black painters in Indianapolis, but it's called A Shared Heritage. It is John Hardrick, Hale Woodruff, William Edward Scott, and William Majors, who is a Black painter from the 60s. So all men. And I don't know. There is a definite theme of loss. The the old conservator at the IMA was telling me that she had restored a set of 4 Hardrick paintings, the 4 seasons, so spring, summer, winter, fall, obviously. And they got stolen and went missing. So like there's this, and then I think it's something throughout the art world, but doesn't there have to be something precious about something to steal it? You know what I mean? To take it from where it's supposed to be and put it someplace else.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll have to think about that one more. Yeah, this kind of play between loss and recovery.
Yeah. And you have, like, this is one of the first iterations of this story and an exhibit. I'm sure there will be other places it goes, and it will continue to evolve. Well,
Definitely.
we want to thank the people who make our exhibits possible at Tube Factory. Thank you to the Ruth Foundation for the Arts, the Ephraimson Family Fund, the Arts Council of Indianapolis, the City of Indianapolis, Indiana Arts Commission, Allen Whitehill Clues Charitable Fund, and the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences. Thank you again so much, Kaila. And if anyone wants more information about you and your work, do you have a website or Instagram you can share with our listeners?
I do have an Instagram. The website is still in the works for maybe a few years.
You can only do so much, okay?
Yeah, I think I might be hitting my max. My Instagram is just my name, Kaila T. Austin, and that's probably the best way to get in touch with me there.
And if you want more information about the exhibit and the live painting dates and the film, you can check at www.bigcar.org. We hope to see you the first Fridays of October 6th, 6 to 10 p.m., November 2nd, I think, the first Friday of November. It's the first Friday of November, 6 to 10 p.m., and
December 1st.
December 1st, 6 to 10 p.m. Our hours are Wednesday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., Saturdays and Sundays, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and admission is always free. Thank you again, Kaila.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Appreciate it.